Good morning, dear colleagues. Good morning, dear colleagues. Good morning, dear colleagues. Let's start with a very quick exercise. Please stand up. Look around and try to find a person whose workshop did you participate yesterday or whose presentation did you listen to yesterday. And smile to that person. Thank you. Now please keep standing and close your eyes and think back to yesterday and trying to remind one good idea, one strategy, one teaching method, one inspiring idea you would like to use in your teaching when you go back to your university. Do you have one? Yeah, share with your neighbor. No. Thank you. Thank you, dear colleagues. Thank you. Ooh. Ooh. Thank you. This was all yesterday. Yeah, today is a new day. And I give microphone to Julius, who is going to introduce today's keynote speaker.
Good morning, everyone. I hope you have already gathered a lot of good ideas from this conference. And indeed, the human miracle is in our ability to make new ideas. But how and where do these ideas come from? And this question becomes even more intriguing with the rise of this generative AI that can create seemingly creative text, images, videos, and audio. Is this the end of human creativity? Do we still have to work on creativity in schools? And what a better way to explore these questions with the next speaker, who has studied human brain and learning for the past 20 years. Trained in psychology, he holds a PhD in neuroscience from the Max Planck Institute of Brain Research in Frankfurt. And he has led a research group here in University of Tartu, untangling the mysteries of natural intelligence through the use of artificial intelligence. His research questions include: what is creativity and how do we come up with the new ideas? Asking those questions scientifically has made him an international expert on the neural mechanism of learning and creativity. However, in addition to the academic success, he is one of Estonia's most renowned thinkers in learning and teaching. To name a few, he has given countless of talks to teachers, students, in schools, in media, and authored 4 books. His latest book on creativity and child development is one of the bestsellers nationwide. Last year, or this year, he got the highest recognition in Estonia, the annual Science Award. So today, we are honored to learn from his energy in learning and studying about creativity and learning himself. So please welcome the man whose family name in Estonian language literally means the mind, Professor Jaan Aru.
Good morning, everyone. So just to be clear, I didn't have any role in writing that introduction. And Julius, one day I will return the favor and you will see how hard it is actually to give a talk after that kind of an introduction. It is almost impossible to live up to that. Yes, so let me start with a story about creativity, because sometimes, no, not that one, sometimes it is very frustrating to talk about creativity. And you would expect that if you talk to teachers, then you have a kind of a receptive audience when you talk about how to enhance creativity in schools. But there I was, roughly 2 years ago, maybe 3 years ago, giving a talk about creativity to roughly the same kind of a large audience of teachers, explaining how to enhance creativity in schools. And then a hand is raised somewhere in the back, and a male teacher stands up and says, "We don't really need this creativity. We have enough of these bad singers and drunken painters. What we need is electricians and software developers." And I said that, yes, I agree. We need more software developers and electricians, but we want them also to be creative. And not creative in the sense that you go to your software developer with a task and they come back and say, "Sorry, couldn't do it, but here's a poem." Not in that sense, but in the sense that we want our software developers and electricians also to be able to come up with new ideas. That is the essence of creativity. It's not about music or painting. It's about the ability to come up with new solutions, whatever your task is. So each and every one of you can be creative and probably is creative when you come to new solutions of how to teach something, for example, right? But the problem is that because people have these preconceptions about creativity that is related to arts, for example, then they don't see that actually their work can also be creative. And as I will go on to say, students don't see it. They don't understand that each and every one of them can be creative. So a very important point to make already here is that according to these ideas, each and every one of us can be creative. And creativity is a skill that relies on having knowledge pieces and combining them towards some new solutions. So it's not that some people are creative and other people are not, but rather some people use this building process more and others do not. And here we come then to an important second point. That is the second word here, motivation. Because when we then ask, okay, but why do then some people build these, use these knowledge pieces to build new solutions, whereas others not, then partly the answer is that motivation is the fuel that helps some people build these things. And what differentiates these people often is not necessarily creativity, but whether they really are motivated to do this or not. And in that sense, after working on creativity for quite a few years, I have turned now my attention partly to try to understand motivation, and today I wanted to share some first ideas on these topics. And we can start with this question. I hope that most of your students are motivated, or that each and every one of you has students who are motivated, but often the problem we encounter is that it seems that students really are not motivated. And one of the first things to ask would be, okay, what could be the reasons why they are not motivated to study, or why are they not motivated in our lectures, for example? And I acknowledge that there could be plenty of reasons, but I will focus on 3 reasons. So the first reason is that many students and also university teachers have the wrong model of motivation. I think you guys, you are kind of knowledgeable about this topic, so not necessarily you, but your colleagues back in your home universities might have it. The second problem is that I will try to show that motivation is highly specific, and often the problem is simply that people have not found their way yet. And third, I will show that motivation also depends on distractions. So if we think about what we ourselves thought about motivation when we went into the university, is that probably we didn't think at all about it. It seemed possibly, and when you ask the students, then this is something they reply, that motivation simply is there. So either you are motivated or not. So it's something you cannot really do anything about. If you're not motivated in a lecture, then it's a boring lecture, right? But what I want to tell you, and again, this is something you might know very well, is that it's not that motivation is simply this kind of a passive process that simply is there, but motivation rather also depends on what you do and whether you do something. Okay? So to bring a kind of a classic example that each and every one of you can relate to, is the difference between active learning versus passive learning, right? Again, you know about this difference, and everybody knows that active learning is better. But what I want to maybe point out to you is that although it's known, and in this study also shown that, active learning here in black, it beats passive learning in tests, then actually if you ask the students these questions of whether you enjoyed the lecture or whether you felt that you learned a great deal from the lecture or whether you wish that all courses would be like that, then for active tasks and for active courses, these ratings are lower, right? So again, this is a known study, so some of you know it. But what I'm pointing at is there is this kind of a paradox that, or we could even call it a motivation trap, that although motivation depends on doing stuff, and although we know that active learning is better, then actually students, at least at first, they don't like it. I mean, this gap here is pretty big, for example, right? And thus, to better understand why doing can lead to motivation and to understand this paradox, I'm asking you these two questions. Can we answer this? Why active learning actually is harder? And can we kind of explain why this active learning actually facilitates learning? And in particular, why this aspect of being hard is related to learning? I don't know, maybe anyone wants to answer this question who has thought more about it. It's early morning, so you don't have to, but I'm basically saying that you can if you want. Now, no hands. Who? Ah, there is a hand. Ah, yeah. Mm-hmm. You have to work, yes. You have to work. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yes, okay, that's the answer. And in principle, I agree, but here I would simply like to say that, my angle, as Julius even too eagerly explained, is also in trying to understand the brain, or what happens in the brain. And for example, the question then I would ask, and I'm asking, is, okay, what is work in the brain? And can we somehow explain why active learning is harder from the neural perspective? And I do think that this is a helpful perspective in this case. So let me try to walk you through it without the slides. In principle, one way to think about it is that when I'm now giving this talk, then I am driving activity in your brains. I am activating your neurons. I am playing the piano of your brain. Sorry for that, but you're here, and I was invited. So this is relatively easy from the brain's perspective, because you are getting all this input from the outside. You don't have to do anything to push the buttons. But when we think about this active learning part, when we think about this work, then the way I think about it is that what you have to do is you have to basically find a way to push the right buttons inside your own brain. So this pushing the buttons, playing the piano comes from inside the brain. One possibility to see it is that it partly relies on the prefrontal cortex. But in any way, one way or another, it is harder because building these internal connections that are not there requires neural work, metabolic work. That's why it's hard. And that's why people generally dislike active learning, and why people generally also dislike any kind of mental work. This is really, it's a scientific fact. There was a big meta-analysis a couple of months ago showing that mental effort is aversive, right? And now I think when we take this perspective that active learning, actively doing something, thinking, is building these internal connections, then we can also explain why it facilitates learning, because once you have built these internal pathways, then it's way easier for you to, for example, retrieve information. If you're asked a question, because you have already kind of during this active process built some of these connections, then now it's for you easier to actually retrieve it. And furthermore, I think we can, based on that, also better understand what this active doing contributes to many other processes, because we could say that in very simplified terms that everyone can watch the same Netflix movies, no problem. You don't need a personality, you don't need any skills for that, right? But your internal being, not the best word, but still a word, it relies on exactly these internal connections you have built. In other sense, in other words, I feel that there is a connection to be made that when you build these internal connections, then because of that, you gain in autonomy, you gain the capacity to self-regulate, and you partly also gain your identity, because your identity is in these internal connections, these knowledge pieces that you can retrieve from within. And coming back to the main topic of this first part, because of the building of these internal connections, you also can be more motivated then. Because you are not passive, but you know that what you do will have an effect. Is this too complex for an early morning talk? Okay, no, thanks. Okay, so that was briefly the first reason why I think some students are not motivated, and one then kind of a recipe for turning that around is that we can do more of this active learning. The other reason is that, it's easy to say that let's support intrinsic motivation, so something that is intrinsic to the person, but intrinsic motivation is highly specific, right? So when I started my university studies, then I fell in love with the problem of consciousness. So I didn't really care about clinical psychology, personality psychology, emotion psychology. I didn't care about these things. I only cared about one thing, and I wanted to work on that. And the problem is that, of course, it would be very nice to kind of activate this kind of intrinsic motivation in each and every student, but it's because it's so specific and each student has kind of their own pattern, their own thing that really intrinsically motivates them, it is extremely hard. Nevertheless, I think that there is something we can do, and for me personally, as a university lecturer, it is important that I kind of at least think about it, that the goal of what I do is to try to find these kind of topics that interest my students, like Julius, right? Try to find the way that I can find the right button so that they are interested, they are motivated. I don't have to work every day and every week on motivating them, but this motivation comes from inside. I think that this, for me, is one of the goals of higher education. And I think we should be also explicit about it and tell the students also that this is something we aim to do, that we try to find the right patterns that are interesting for these students. And in the university, we have at least two mechanisms for trying to find the intrinsic motivation. The first is expanding the mind of the students. What I mean by that is that, well, if students come to the university, then they might kind of be interested in some topic, let's say education or psychology, but they cannot know what is their intrinsic motivation because they simply are not aware of the questions that might be interesting. Again, as I said, I fell in love with the problem of consciousness, but back in my school, I even didn't know that this problem existed, right? So I couldn't fall in love with it. I couldn't be intrinsically motivated by it because I didn't know it existed. So something that we in higher education want to do and aim to do is to expand the mind and for example, my dear PhD student Julius always tells that lectures are a super boring and outdated way to teach, but lectures can be an effective tool to tell students about these possibilities, about these topics that they never even heard about, right? So my hope is, for example, also that by giving a talk that perhaps is a bit out of your usual thinking a bit, then I can a bit expand your minds, right, and make these interesting contacts. But this is even way more important for students who come to the university and who might be interested in something, but they still don't know because they even haven't heard about it. So our task as lecturers is to broaden the mind, to show these different possibilities, these interesting topics. And the second aspect is funneling, which means that we have the mechanisms in the university to first to kind of try to find students who are intrinsically motivated in some topic and then help them to go on to work on this topic that they are intrinsically motivated about, right? That they can do their bachelor, that we have all the students, then we have some students who are in your lecture, then if they are motivated about it, they do a bachelor thesis with you, then some of them do the master thesis with you, and perhaps this one guy does a PhD with you, right? That this is a method to funnel people into the topics that are motivating for their brains. And maybe to make it very clear, I advocate for the view that it should not be that the supervisor chooses all of the topics that what do you do in bachelor thesis, what do you do in master thesis, what do you do in your PhD, but rather it should be kind of discussion, debate throughout the studies of what is the best thing that matches with the interests of the student and with the knowledge of the supervisor. So I'm not saying that we should do only these things that students want to do, but again, keep in mind this expansion also. We want to expand their mind, we want to give them these topics that might be interesting, but kind of taking into account what does this brain really want to do. Again, because if we find that, then we don't have to motivate these people. They are motivated intrinsically. And this is, it's not simple. And the general note is that why this thing is hard is that developing any interest, developing these intrinsic connections, developing intrinsic motivation takes a lot of time, and it is a long process. It's work. It's work. And the third reason then is directly related to that. So the third reason why it's very hard for students to be motivated. The third reason is that, as I said, finding your own topic, being motivated, it requires time, it requires work. But I think that the environments we have today, they are not necessarily supporting this kind of aspect where you need to do work and you need a lot of time and you need to devote your motivation into something, because motivation is a limited resource, in the sense that if you have other kind of things or sources that require your motivation or take away your motivation, then it's for you harder to focus on these topics that might be really the most important for you. Let me make this more concrete. So the example I have worked on for quite a few years is the example of thinking about how the technology that relies on instant gratification can hinder motivation and hinder doing something that requires work, right? I don't know how much you have observed it within your students, but what's important to understand when we think about the brain is that it's not, and this is another naive view of motivation, it's not like that, the student simply chooses, oh, I want to work on this topic, this is what my life will be, and I will become great in it. It's not like that. Rather, in the brain, you have a competition between different systems, right? You have a competition always. I guess some of you know it. Some of you even experience it right now, that some of you are getting tired, some of you already perhaps have taken out their smartphones, right? Because that's the internal battle we have in our brains. That it's not that we kind of set the motivation and go for it, but we always have these different systems trying to being motivated by different things, right? Perhaps to be more concrete, let's put on this figure made by Julius, by the way. And so what goes on in the brain of each and every one of us, but also in the brains of each and every one of our students, is this kind of a competition, this kind of a computation of what is the best thing I could do right now. And basically, the brain then computes the difference between the benefits and costs of each of these things. And what I have pointed out for quite some time is that a smartphone, or for example, being in TikTok, has a very, very high value because every time you perceive something novel, some interesting video, it is gratifying for the brain. But the cost is simply only moving the finger so slightly. That's the cost. Whereas when we talked about work, right? In the university, you need to write a thesis, you need to do an experiment. Then that is real work, that is something where the immediate benefit is very low because the result might be in May, right? In your master thesis in May, but the cost, because of the work, because you need to rely on these internal connections, is very high. So, I myself might have already lost the track of what I'm telling you about, but I will try to make it good again. The point is that these kinds of battles, this is the battle for our motivation. And so when we're trying to answer why our students are not motivated, then it can be because of these kinds of distractions, these very cheap things that try to pull us away from the things we are interested about. So if you put this topic. So let's say the student basically has some kind of a topic, let's say in your field in education. They really they are interested in that topic. They want to work on that topic. But then every now and then this motivation pops up and it distracts them from their work, right? It takes away hours from their work. It hinders them for being really great. I'm not saying that everybody has this problem, and I'm still looking for really good studies who would, for example, study this within the context of higher education, so the effect of these tools on long-term motivation. But I think we have to be aware of these things, that this is a competition for the motivation, and as explained, motivation is like the fuel for what we do and whether we can or cannot be creative. Okay, I have talked for a long time. Are there any immediate questions that require answering? Yes.
Hello. You framed the issue of motivation or lack of motivation in contemporary terms, in terms of, for example, the immediate gratification of smartphone. But my question is this motivational problem, is it new, is it contemporary, or has there always been in some form this issue?
Yeah, great question of whether we now blame the smartphones, TikTok, etc. Has this problem always been? To some extent it always has been that there are always some distractions. But what is the difference is that this distraction is way more powerful because it has been designed specifically to keep our attention on it. So back in the days when I was a student, we had a TV. But of course, how much can you watch TV, right? It is way more boring, and it doesn't have these mechanisms meant to actually keep you hooked. But these, when we think about, for example, TikTok, these programs have been designed with one goal, and one goal only, to keep you engaged, keep you there. And that's why these things are simply worse or are level more, level more worse in their ability to actually do harm. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm having a hard time wrapping my head around everything like music, exercise, reading versus smartphone, because what is being described is the consumption of already created things. And for, as far as I understood, everything else, you have to make the effort, and you're creating music or you're playing music or you're doing the exercise. So I'm thinking, did we also think about not just the consumption, but also the creation? What about if I am
creating a video in TikTok, you mean?
Sorry?
Creating a video in TikTok.
Yes, being a content creator, because then
No, I mean, when
it's flipped around.
When I'm explaining it to students or school children, then I'm also saying that, of course, when you need to choose between being a passive consumer or an active creator, of course, the second one is way better. But if we look, of course, at the details, or we look at the statistics, then most students still, they are simply passive consumers, even if they have these high aspirations to become a creator. But in principle, yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Stand up. So thanks very much for this fascinating talk. It's a really good way to start the day. I was thinking about these intrinsic connections you talk about, and presumably they're formed very early in our lives through our upbringing and our education. Yesterday we were having a discussion, Estelle Blanquet from Bordeaux, talking about the way girls are not encouraged to be scientists. So the question is really to do with how we move from something which is established young and is probably partly genetic and partly upbringing, to what we do in higher education, because these kids come to us with a history, and they're already formed, aren't they? So how do we bridge that?
Yeah, definitely. There is some part of that comes together with their upbringing, but especially as I want to show in the next slides, there are ways how we can actually do it. So maybe I will go and tell you a few slides about creativity also, because I think this is nicely tries to answer. If it doesn't, please come and ask again. But the same thing, so we discussed about motivation, but the same question we can ask about creativity of why students are not creative. And I think this has been largely the topic also in this nice conference. So probably many of you kind of have your own reasons for it, but I want to go kind of the same way I went with motivation, and I might not come to the last part. Is that, again, there is this wrong model of creativity, which I already briefly mentioned and which links to your question, that many students, and also this applies to school children, they tend to think that, well, yeah, he or she is good in thinking or being creative, but I'm not. I don't have the capability. And what I told you briefly in the beginning already is that we should, in higher education, very much tell to each of our students that it's not fixed. Yes, you come with this baggage from your childhood, but in their 20s, children or young adults, they are still very, very malleable. I personally think that when the young adult finds the topic they are interested about, then the past really doesn't matter at all. And there are great examples from the history also about it. That because if you find this thing that really drives you, that really is inspiring for you, then you are way quicker to learn and you have the energy to do it. So one of the key things we should definitely tell in higher education to each and every one of our students is that you can actually change and you can be creative if you want to. But with creativity, it's worth saying that the trap is basically the same as with motivation, and perhaps even worse, because we talked about active learning and how it's work, how you need to build these internal connections, right? But creativity is even more about building these internal connections. So active learning, you do some kind of a task in the classroom, right? They have to use these internal connections for 20 minutes, perhaps. But if you're doing something creative, then you need to be able to do this work many hours each day, basically, right? So, and because, as we discussed in the first part, this is hard, and this is aversive, then it's very easy for students to give up on, or even not to try, basically, because, I mean, you also have this feeling sometimes, I guess, that, you know, you're starting to do something, it seems too complex, and then you feel like giving up. You probably know that, you know, if you push harder, you can do it, and you push harder. But students and school children, they often think, well, that's the limit, that's my limit. We have to be there to say it's not the limit. You can always push harder. You have to make breaks, not always push harder, but in principle, each and every brain can come up to new solutions and innovative thoughts. The second problem is also related to that, of why students are not creative, is that do we actually give a chance to our students to be creative in higher education? I guess each and every one of you does it. You're here in this conference after all. But I'm not sure, and probably many of you also would agree, that higher education often in many classes and many ways it does not give enough room for creativity. Because what creativity requires is this possibility to even try to build these internal connections, and you need to have enough time for that, right? So when we think about it, then I think one way to think about it is to consider the bachelor or master thesis, for example, because I have seen enough of these examples, and probably you also, where the supervisor gives the thesis and explicitly tells each and every step what the student has to do. This is funny. Indeed. Okay, but it's a big problem because it is an example how it could be a task where we facilitate creativity, but instead we don't allow for it. So this is something, and this is, I think, something that can be done very easily, is that when we discuss a bachelor thesis or master thesis or even maybe a student project, then instead of saying explicitly every step what they need to do, we say, look, yes, I know it feels hard, it feels like your mind is going to explode, but just try to come up with some ideas. Let's discuss these ideas. And some of the ideas will be bad, but that's part of it, right? So, and as I explained previously already briefly, my philosophy is that, I always try to find these topics in the discussion with students. Some students hate me for that, and from some students I never hear again after our first discussion. But I feel that this is something that still that we want to do, and that we need to do in especially in higher education, because here we could give them this possibility to explore themselves. We should encourage that, and especially with bachelor thesis, for example, I think the result of the thesis is not so important. The process or the journey is way more important in becoming smarter and becoming more creative. And for example, when we briefly talk about the PhD students, then some of my PhD students, do they hate me? They don't. Okay, they maybe hate me. Also because I don't tell how to solve this task. I don't tell them. All right? But my goal with the PhD student, Julius, now listen. My goal is that when they finish the PhD, then they are almost grown-up scientists in the sense that they can work independently. And to be able to do that, they need to do independent work already throughout their PhD. So this is one thing where we can help our students and facilitate our students to be more creative. I have a few slides I will jump over, and I will briefly mention that, the third reason why I think in today's world it's hard to facilitate creativity is that we cannot really give, for example, we cannot give essays anymore to help students work at home, because they can do this work with generative AI. I know that this has been anyway the topic of this conference also, so it's okay if I don't have time to go into it. So in that sense, if I summarize now, you saw for both creativity and motivation, I listed 3 reasons why it's hard. And the third reason in both cases was technological. In case of motivation, we talked about it, that this is because these tools that the students all the time carry with them, they are just kind of attracting a lot of their attention and taking motivation resources away. In terms of creativity, this is it that I didn't talk about. The middle reason was that there's something we can do, that many students haven't found their motivation, they haven't found what interests them. We can help them. I gave you some very vague tools for that. And in terms of creativity also, we have to make it possible for the students to be creative. Otherwise, we cannot demand them to be creative, right? We have to give them this room. And I think, especially when it comes to this kind of a creativity, then each and every one of us probably is doing that already, but we can try to push it in our universities that more of our colleagues would also do it. And finally, in both cases, cases of creativity and motivation, the first reason was that the students have the wrong model of motivation and of creativity. And I think that this is something we can basically fix right now, that in our courses, we tell to students, what is creativity? That it's not something that, some people have, others don't. It's a process that everybody can do. And we explain them also about motivation, that it's not something that if you feel that the lecture is boring and you want to check TikTok, that this reflects reality, but rather this reflects simply you haven't still figured out what's perhaps interesting about it. I hope that in this long journey I could tell you some things that seemed a bit interesting, and if we started with the story about angry questions, then perhaps you also have some angry or perhaps some friendly questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Jaan, and also now we have time to ask your own questions, a really good way to actually activate your brain. So please wait, raise your hand and please wait for the microphone, and then you can ask the question.
Tere, Jaan. Good to have you here. I always very much enjoy your talks. I just want to link your talk to the talk from the keynote speaker from yesterday. And I already kind of disagreed with what I heard from yesterday, that we should give up giving reading and writing assignments to students. We should only do group work and, do all this innovation together and no individual reading and writing anymore. But what I hear from you is that we actually do still need that. Would you agree?
Well, it's difficult because when I started my new course 2 years ago, then I gave reading assignments and writing assignments. But then that November, ChatGPT came out, and last year I already removed all of these assignments because I don't want to be the person who needs to figure out whether this has been written by AI or not, right? In my courses, I have for now removed that. I always give a reading list, and I say that I recommend reading it, but I don't make any illusions about it. I do agree that these skills are very important, but perhaps then instead of letting them write essays, we could bring some of that writing into the classroom. We have done it in our course, for example, that now every lecture we have 5 to 10 minutes in the middle of the class where they have a written assignment where they have to write, and yeah. So it is, and this is the problem. I didn't go into that. I think it is these tools are very disruptive of education, and I have made my choice. I don't say that it's the right choice. Some of you can also say that I continue giving written assignments, and I do read them even if I think that 20% or 30% or 40% of them are AI generated. Yeah.
I can give you a tip, since I teach philosophy, and I cannot imagine learning philosophy without doing some reading and writing. What I do in my classes is I explain to the students that why do they need to read and write? And actually, I think many people do underestimate the ability of students to understand. So once they understand that they really need to do their own work, they are ready to do it. And what I do is I also tell them, you need to write this essay. You need to do it on your own. Please do not use ChatGPT or anything else. I cannot prove whether you've done it on your own or not. But if I have a suspicion that this is not your own writing, I will invite you to have a chat with me about this text.
That's pretty scary.
And it actually works.
Yeah, I agree, and maybe it helps me to make a kind of a rule of thumb is that if you have a course where you have, let's say, 20 or 15 dedicated students, then definitely that's the way to go also. But for example, in my course, I have 120 students, right? If all of them write essays and 30% use ChatGPT, then I will... So this is a rule of thumb that perhaps we should, because of that, have more of these focused seminars and courses where we can be more intimate with the students and tell them exactly these things and be more sure that they actually will use their own brain. Yeah. Thanks.
Thank you very much for this great talk. I realized myself that I need to motivate my students, and I put a lot of things trying to cater to different learners in my courses. But what I struggle with, and I see from your talk that I made it for myself interesting. So my background is in nuclear physics, and I enter a science education field, and I'm learning very fast what you can do. So it seems like because I'm very motivated. But I wonder if you could advise something on how to motivate other science students, science teachers, sorry, because I guess they also need their motivation. Why would they change their course, the way how they teach? I think probably for them the same thing also true, right? Like as students would be motivated to study better if they see why they do that, if they know what they would like to do. So it's probably similar to science teacher, and you're from computer sciences departments, right? So if I have only my own view, how can I be motivated to cater to students that maybe would like to program, but in absolutely different way than I? Why would I be interested? I mean, I am, but how can I get the other teachers on board? This is my main issue. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, in the end, it is complex because, as I maybe too briefly explained, our brains are very different, right? Each and every one of us is motivated in very different ways, and some of them want to have a very specific way of how they do things. Others are more broad and looking for more possibilities. So I see it this way that, we cannot change everyone. And it's also a strength of higher education that we have so many different lecturers who have their own different styles. So what we can say, and at least for everyone here, is to keep an open mind that perhaps my methods and the way I do things are not optimal, that I am always trying to evolve, always trying to be better, and try to sell this standpoint also for other teachers. But it will be always that there are some who will remain with their tools and their way of doing things. So we cannot change everybody. We even don't have to do it. But I think, again, when I use the same word that I used in my presentation, our goal in higher education is to expand the minds, not only of students, but also of teachers.
So we have time for the last quick question. So please be concise. Okay, back there. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much for this interesting talk. What do you think how assessment criteria and creativity are related? Can there be any prefixed assessment criteria if we give a task with creativity in the center of our task?
So as I highlighted here in the last part briefly, it's complex because we don't have even often good tasks that they actually are creative tasks, right? And now, for example, we discussed it with homeworks, right? That there are these problems of generative AI. So let me come just to the thesis works. That I think it is wrong, and I try to explain it in my institute also, that it's wrong to assess the thesis based on the results, especially the bachelor thesis. Because for me, bachelor thesis, it's not about results, it's about the process. So that when I read a thesis, I want to know how many things they have tried. Have these ideas been everything really standard, or have they tried something that is a bit different, right? So this is kind of looking for these creative leaps, or looking for places where the student has actually done work in the terms we have discussed today, and I think this should be inherent and perhaps the defining criteria if you want to assess whether there has been any creativity involved. We want to think of whether, whether it is completely out of the box, but when we read the thesis or the essay or the work, we want to think about, evaluate whether this thought or this experiment, it required the student to put in some work and effort. And even if it failed, it is then worthy of a better grade in terms of creativity. Yeah.
So thank you. I guess you have very many questions and you have played your internal piano this session. But let's give a round of applause to Jaan. And I'll give the mic to Tiina now.
Thank you. Before we go to our coffee pause, I forgot to say what I wanted to tell you. Yes, very important actually. I wanted to thank all the organizers of this conference. During these 3 days, I'm one of the organizers, but actually during the 3 last days, I realized that there's a lot of work that has been done behind my back that I haven't even been aware of. But I would like to say a big thank you to Mari Karm, who's the main brain. And Kristel Pedassar, who's the hands and brains and legs. And also I would like to, that those teachers who've been moderating the sessions and all the volunteer students and everybody who has contributed to organizing this conference, please stand up for a second. And let's give them an applause. Thank you very much. I personally have really enjoyed this conference, hosting this conference. You've been an excellent audience. Thank you very much. And see you in 5 years' time, maybe again in Tartu. Thank you.